Hello and welcome back to MBC Bracketology 2020. Andrew Sullivan, Connell Scruggs, JP Eisenhower, and Andrew Feeney here with you to preview the GHSA 4A state football playoffs. Taking a look at the bracket today as we show you your first look. The Marist War Eagles in the bottom right quadrant, Connell. And let's take a look at that first team. It's going to be Central to start it off. Marist playing Central this Saturday, actually. Now at 5:30 is how we are believing it will take place. Central, a very good football team for the region. They love to keep the football on the ground. They have a big ground game, led by Narada Levette, who has 1,600 rushing yards on the season. That's the second most in the entire state this season. That's the most in 4A, second most in the entire state all class. 16 touchdowns on the year. 430 yards and 4 touchdowns in a single game against Northwest Whitfield earlier this year. That's just staggering numbers. As a team, they have over 2,000 yards rushing the ball. Only 700 in the air, though. And that kind of plays into Marist's strengths, I think. What do you guys see there? Marist, very good stopping the run.
Right, I agree with you. I think this is a really good matchup for Marist. I think any team that relies on running the ball for most of their offense and struggles to match up physically on defense, I think that's a really good matchup for Marist, and that's kind of what Central is. They've struggled to stop offenses that aren't really that good, and I think Marist matches up really well against that. I think they can run the ball up the middle, stretch it to the outside. We kind of saw that a lot against Mays, kind of stretch the linebackers and just run it right down the middle with Lincoln Parker as well, and then even mix it in the passing game, which we saw Champ Davis do last week against Mays. He looked extremely good. His confidence looked a lot better making passes. I think like what you said, Marist just matches up well against him.
Yeah. And JP, your takeaways from last week's game for Marist?
Well, last week, I think we know now that Champ is definitely going to be the clear starter, and I think the running defense for Marist is going to be huge. We saw it against Stevenson also. Really, Marist was able to shut down the run, and going into this game, that's going to be a really focal point of this Marist defense. But I think one thing that you need to take away is at the very end of that second half where Mays was able to drive down the field, that is definitely going to be a huge concern in the Marist secondary. Definitely something to look for. We're going to have to look for going into teams that run more of an air raid offense and pass the ball more.
Yeah, I think it's clear that if a team wants to beat Marist, they're going to have to stretch the field, and we really haven't been able to see a team do that successfully other than at the end, I think, of the first half you meant. I think in the end of the first half of the game against Mays last week. And, I mean, it was a lot of little short passes and yards after the catch that was moving them down the field. I think that, but other than that one drive, they didn't move the ball well, except for when our backups were in. So I think takeaway is really the only way a team's going to beat Marist is passing the ball successfully.
Yeah, dink and dunk, and then get those short games 4 to 5 yards of play. That's key. I don't think it's most teams aren't going to be able to do that on the ground. That's why I think Central might struggle in this opening game against Marist. As we said, 5:30 Saturday is the current time. We'll see if that changes, but I think defensively they've given up a lot of points. Central has this year. They're going to struggle to stop that Marist offense, who has just upped their dynamic aspect in the air game this past couple of weeks, implementing a lot of short out routes into the flats with especially running backs getting out there out of the backfield, and I think they'll struggle to stop Marist. And they gave up a ton of points to Cedartown. That's who won that region, Region 7. They're the number 4 seed out of that region. They picked up a big win this past week to make the playoffs, I think, but they struggled to stop Cedartown. I think they'll struggle to stop Marist this week. So we take a look at a potential second-round matchup here for the Marist War Eagles. Bottom right, Flowery Branch, a team that Marist played in the past 2 years in the region play. Beat them both years. Last year, Flowery Branch was a good team there. They're back at it as a number 2 seed this year.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, a team that wants to beat Marist is going to have to stretch the field, and I think that Flowery Branch can do this. They are 8-2 so far, 5-1 in the region. Their offense is putting up a solid 32.5 points per game, and they're led by their junior quarterback David Renard. He's got 66% completion percentage, a little over 2,100 passing yards, 18 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. And he's a dual threat. He's got 330 rushing yards on the ground, and he's got 4 touchdowns rushing. I think they got a dual, like a two-headed dragon at running back in Miles Ivey and senior Jason Ellingham. They're both over 550 rushing yards. Ivy, while younger and smaller, gets the majority of the carries. He's more of a receiving threat. But Ellingham has become more of the red zone threat, the guy that gets the ball when they're in the red zone near the goal line. He's the bigger running back, and he gets less carries, but he has 8 more touchdowns than Ivy. Their starting receivers, they're led by senior Connor Larson. He's the best on the team, tallying up 45 receptions for 787 yards and 4 touchdowns. He stretches the field very well for this team. And obviously something they're going to want to look to do on defense is stop Marist in the run. But their defense is nothing great, nothing bad. It's just average at everything. They allow 22 points per game. They're near the league averages in allowed rushing yards and allowed receiving yards. This team's only 2 losses have come to Jefferson and Pius, but in both games they allowed over 38 points. This team is extremely balanced, though. 250 passing yards per game, 200 rushing yards, and they have exactly 20 rushing touchdowns and 20 passing touchdowns. They're a good team, and I think they're definitely a sleeper pick that if they beat Marist, somehow stretch the field with David Renard and are able to pull off an upset against Marist, they're a team that can make it to the top 4.
Yeah, definitely a team that has struggled a little bit this year defensively compared to last year. They lost a lot of their talent out of the backfield, in the defensive backfield, rather. Lost a lot of seniors. I think they had 8 or 9 seniors last year defensively that left. But a team that could challenge Marist, unlike anybody we've seen this year. Marist has gone rather untested, and I think that's a concern for the War Eagles coming to the playoffs, is they haven't played in a close game yet this year, and we'll see how everybody reacts to the pressure of playing in a close game. I think last year they were well tested, especially the BT game every year typically tests Marist going to the playoffs. Didn't have that this year, so I think it'll be interesting to see how, like if a junior quarterback that doesn't have a ton of experience in Champ Davis or Hayden Richardson responds in pressure situations, but I think they might get some of those in the playoffs as you normally would, and we'll see how they react. Lots of veterans, though, in the senior class that can help them through that.
Right, and I think one thing that jumps out here about Flowery Branch for me is those 2 teams they lost to, Jefferson and Pius, they both run the triple option offense, and they gave up 38-plus points. So I think for Flowery Branch to compete in that game, they're going to have to get it done on offense, to stay with Marist, because giving up 38-plus points to triple option offenses, that's kind of a red flag there. So I'd look out for that.
100%.
Yeah. And I think the main concern for me for Flowery Branch is when you're giving up a lot of points to triple option teams, and your the major gains in your offense is through the running game. Marist has been able to stop the running game all year. I don't know if Flowery Branch, if they get behind early in that game, I don't know if they're going to be able to come back.
Well, and I think the way to stop Marist, as we saw last year at Oconee County, you have to stop the run first, is the most important part to stop that Marist offense. Oconee County did that. I think that's why we're seeing Marist trying to get more dynamic, is so they aren't a run-stopping defense can't slow them down. But I think that's still the way to stop Marist, and I'm not sure Flowery Branch could do that because of the way you saw them play against Pius. Maybe they got better throughout the year, but in the second half they just couldn't stop Pius, and that's a team that puts the ball on the ground a ton. So I think that'll be a struggle for them. As we're going to move on to Perry in this bottom right, they're at the top half. They're the other number 1 seed in the bottom right quadrant. They're out of Region 4. They're going to have a Westover in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, this is really, realistically, the only other team that can compete in this bottom part of the bracket with Marist, other than Flowery Branch, in my opinion. They're 6-4 in the season so far, 6-0 in the region. The offense is really the weakness in this team. It's just mediocre. They're only putting up 21 points per game. Their starting quarterback Lane is a senior, Lane Rucker. He is a 60% completion percentage, 1,700 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, 7 picks. He's not a dual threat whatsoever, and that really hurts this team. He only has 14 carries for 23 yards. He's 100% a pocket passer, and another problem is he is sloppy with the ball. Like I said earlier, he has 7 picks, and he also has 3 lost fumbles. So 11 touchdowns to 10 turnovers is not a great ratio. Their running back, they really have one main guy on the ground in Mikael Kendrick. He has 164 carries, 800 yards, 10 touchdowns. He's a very explosive running back, has had 5 100-plus yard games, and he's very elusive. They have 2 main receivers. They're both juniors, Curtis Head and Daquan Wright. Each have 450-plus passing yards, and they have combined for a total of 9 touchdowns. They're great receivers, and when the run game is going well, that it really opens the opportunity for play action passes and for big plays down the field. Their defense is definitely their strong suit. They only allow about 17 points per game, 170 reception yards, 130 rush yards. They're led by sophomore free safety Cameron Marshall. He has 5 pass breakups, an interception, 89 total tackles, and 1 sack on the year. Overall, the defense is a very stout group, and it's hard to beat this team on defense. Team consensus overall, the weakness is the offense. All of their 4 losses, the offense has failed to put up more than 14 points. In 3 of those games, they only put up 10 points. It's really just the lack of ability to stretch the field in the passing game. When the running game is not working, that's when this team struggles and falls behind.
Well, and they had a big win against Baldwin this past weekend to secure that region championship in Region 4. Meanwhile, Baldwin has gotten stuck on the other side of the bracket. They'll have to probably face Carver Columbus. We'll take a look at that a little later on. But Perry, one of the teams at the top. Marist could have to travel to Perry in the quarterfinals if both teams got that far. That would be a coin toss to determine home seed. Perry is down around the Milledgeville, Macon area, so a little bit of a drive. Nothing like Bainbridge, who we'll talk about in a minute, but LaGrange, the other team I would take a look at up in that top half of the bottom right quadrant. They'll have a big matchup against New Hampstead and then potentially Perry. That one could determine who's into the quarterfinals. That's who we would expect to be playing in the second round, is Perry and LaGrange there. Let's transition to the top half of this right side of the bracket. 2 teams to look out for really here on this top right is Bainbridge and Cedartown, the 2-1 seeds. Let's start with Bainbridge, just a star-studded team that loves to throw the ball around. They actually started off with 3 losses early on in this season, but they've bounced back nicely. They're led by quarterback who's a senior, Quade Hawkins. He's been starting for almost 3 years now. He took over the program as a starter in the middle of his sophomore year. He helped lead a 5-5 regular season Bainbridge Bearcats team to a state championship, their second ever in school history, with big upsets on the way. Buford they beat 23-20. Then they defeated Warner Robins in triple overtime in the championship, a team that beat them 38-0 earlier that year. So big-time performances back then, 2.5 years ago. Now they're looking to make a similar run. He's leading the way. He's committed to Troy. He's thrown for nearly 1,500 yards this season and 16 touchdowns. They love to spread the ball out. They also have a star running back in Rashad Broadnax. He's quickly approaching 1,000 yards rushing this season, 13 rushing touchdowns. And then they have the Bowie trio in Dion, Zion, and Trey Bowie. Zion's a star safety return man, but Dion is the really explosive player. Dion Bowie committed to Georgia as an athlete, 5-star, one of the best players in the whole class of 2022 in the country. The only issue is he's currently out with a knee injury, yet to play this season. As of the beginning of the season, the coaching staff was hopeful that they could get him back for playoffs. We'll see how that stands if he's back this week or any time in the playoffs, but he's a difference maker. He would make that offense much more balanced. They can give the ball to him. He's a return man. He's just an explosive player, hard to stop. Very small, shifty guy. And all 3 losses this year outside of 4A, Coffee, Valdosta, Ware County. What an opening schedule they had to play. 2 top teams in 5A and a top team in 6A. The last one against Ware County, 35-30 loss. That's one that'll make you say they're a real contender in 4A, because Ware County was number 1 for a while in 5A before losing by 1 score to Warner Robins for that region title up in 5A. So that one's a game that'll make you say, wow, this team can compete. Because before that, 45-7 loss to Valdosta doesn't really tell you anything. That Coffee lost by 2 touchdowns, but that one against Ware County proved they can compete. The only issue is defensively they've given up big numbers in 31, 35, and 45 in those 3 games. They're going to have to stop somebody. If not, it's going to be just a shootout, and that's kind of what I would expect if Marist ended up playing Bainbridge, is just a shootout.
Yeah, very interesting in matchup-wise if Marist were to play Bainbridge, because they're a team that can get it done through the air, which is kind of what you have to do in order to beat Marist. You gotta be able to get something done through the air, which is what they can do. However, they are kind of lacking on the defensive side, which means Marist could stay right with them in the game, or they're going to control the clock too, the way that Marist runs their offense. So that'd be a very interesting game. I think Marist Bainbridge would.
Yeah, and I think if Marist got behind in a football game, that'd be very interesting to see how that one went. Because with this style of play Marist plays, I mean, even though they've gotten more dynamic over the years, they still don't want to be. You don't want to be down by more than 2 scores, or you're in trouble with this Marist team. Bainbridge taking on Westside Macon this week, Region 4, 4th seed. And then they'll probably get Islands or Hardaway. Kind of hard to tell this year with bracketology how good some of these teams are with COVID scenarios, not playing a lot of games. Islands is one of those teams. They're the number 2 seed out of Region 3. But they didn't even play Benedictine, the number 1 seed out of that region. Benedictine didn't play a single region game. There was an agreement there because of public school issues. But they just didn't play a region game, so it's hard to tell with some of these teams. Islands really hasn't been tested too much, and they'll get a test right away with Hardaway. That's a pretty good team out of the Carver-Columbus region and Region 2. And then we take a look at that top half in Cedartown, Connell. That's the team to look out for as well.
Right, and like Bainbridge, they started off kind of weak on their season, 0-2, but those losses were against really good teams. Rockmart and Calhoun, who have a combined record of 16-4. This is a team that loves to run the ball. They average 270 yards per game on the ground, which is 82% of their total offense. And they like to spread it around to many different guys in the run game. They have 4 different players who have rushed for 100-plus yards in a game this season. So they really get it done with a lot of different guys, which is solid. You got fresh legs all the time. If one guy doesn't have a good game, you got other options. But their leading rusher is Harlem Diamond. He's got 7.5 yards per carry this season, so he's a very effective runner. However, on offense, QB play has been their problem. They've thrown more interceptions than touchdowns, and they have under 50% completion percentage. But they score 29 points per game, and then on defense, they only give up 12 points per game. They're very opportunistic. They've forced 21 turnovers this season, which is almost 3 a game, so you're getting the ball 3 more times than the other team a game. That's definitely going to help you. Especially when you like to control the clock and in the run game. They're led by C.J. Washington, who's a 4-star linebacker committed to Georgia, and Jaden Johnson, who's a 3-star safety committed to South Carolina. And the game I'd probably look for to tell how good they are is versus Calhoun. They lost 14-7, but they competed very hard in that game. They held Calhoun to just 3.5 yards per carry and 87 yards on the ground, and that's a very talented Calhoun team at that. Team that competed with both Cartersville and Blessed Trinity in 5A. Defense played great on 3rd down, but they lost due to turnovers on offense and struggling just generally on offense, only averaging 3.6 yards per carry in that game. So they're going to need to get it done in the running game in order to be successful.
Yeah, and I think Marist would match up much better against Cedartown than Bainbridge, just because Marist defensively, you would love to go up against a running team rather than an air raid. Even though the secondary for Marist is very good this year, it's just hard in high school football. If you get good wide receivers and an accurate quarterback, it's just hard to stop those 5, 10-yard routes from being completions. That's what we saw at Oconee County last year. Max Johnson to Jake Johnson was basically unstoppable, despite talented defense by the War Eagles. And Cedartown, the team Marist faced last year, opening round, they lost their Clemson committed running back last year, who was a senior, but they just struggled to stop Marist defensively. They put up some points, I believe it was 40-22, but they just struggled to stop Marist. And I think it's an improved defense this year, certainly. So that'll be an interesting matchup. Cedartown, probably Cedartown Bainbridge up there in that quarterfinals is what I'd be looking at, and that'll be another coin flip likely to determine home seed. And then if Marist matched up with Bainbridge or Cedartown, another coin flip for home field advantage in the semis. Let's go over to the left side of the bracket. Let's start bottom left. That's where a ton of talented teams are located, mainly Jefferson and Carver-Columbus. Let's start with Jefferson, guys. Number 2 ranked team in 4A currently, right behind the Marist War Eagles all season long.
Yeah, and I think 1 and 2 are interchangeable almost. I mean, Marist and Jefferson have definitely separated themselves from the rest of the teams. Jefferson's definitely the favorite to come out of the left side of the bracket. Their offense is averaging 44.4 points per game. They're a triple option team, and they're a heavy running team. They could go entire games without throwing a pass, and they're led by quarterback Malachi Starks. He's a 5-star athlete who's committed to UGA. He's 10 of 28 on the season for 286 yards and 7 touchdowns. He has 2 interceptions, but on the ground is really where he does most of his damage. He has 75 carries for 759 yards and 12 touchdowns. He has a long of a 73-yard run. He averages a first down every single time he touches the ball. He is just an elite athlete. He is extremely elusive. He is a strong player. You could watch clips of him running over linebackers. He is just all around one of the best players on this Jefferson team. And when you look at in the backfield, Colton Jones, the running back, he has 402 yards and 4 total touchdowns. He averages 12.6 yards per carry. And then when they throw the ball, Jordan Perry has 3 touchdowns, 97 yards receiving. But even as a receiver, he has more rushing yards than he has receiving yards. He has 240 rushing yards. And also on defense, he has 2 interceptions. And they have 33 rushing touchdowns on the season. They have 4 players over 200 rushing yards. This is a team that this is an offense that isn't trying to hide anything. They're trying to run the ball, and they're going to make it obvious that they're trying to run the ball. They do have 12 fumbles, though, this season. 8 of them were lost. That is definitely going to be a concern going into the future. They cannot lose possessions in close games. But on defense, they've really, when we talk so much about Jefferson's offense, their defense is really being lost. They're only giving up 9.9 yards per game. They have 16 sacks on the season, and they forced 12 turnovers. On that defense, Rem Maxwell, the linebacker, leads the team with 42 tackles, 26 of which are solo tackles. And then Caden Bailey, the middle linebacker, and Paxton Corkey, the outside linebacker, have combined for 9.5 of those sacks. This is really the most complete team that Marist has the possibility of facing, and they would face them in the championship if they were to have to play them.
Definitely a running team, though.
Definitely.
But a ton of athletes, good defense, and that would be an interesting matchup if we ever got to see it. Jefferson, the Region 8 champion down there, and then the other number 1 seed down there would be Carver Columbus. We'll talk about them in a second. Jefferson, that Flowery Branch one was pretty impressive. 40-10 over Flowery Branch, a team that has been pretty competitive this year.
Yeah, when you just look at the physical attributes of Malachi Starks. I mean, he's 6'2", 205. In the 100-meter dash, he's also a track star. He ran an 11:02. I mean, he's just a complete athlete.
Yep. And they might match up with Hapeville in the second round. I would favor Hapeville over Heritage Catoosa. Hapeville got a big win over Stevenson. Probably not going to help them out in the fact that they have to face Jefferson likely in the second round. They get Heritage Catoosa at home, though, in the first round. I'd favor them in that game. And then Jefferson, that'll be a tough matchup. But it'll show Marist where they kind of stand based on how Hapeville performs against Jefferson. And then bottom left quadrant, you got Baldwin and Thomas County Central, 2-3 matchup. I like Baldwin probably in that one. And then Jenkins, Carver Columbus, the other 1 seed down there.
Yeah.
Very good team.
And Carver Columbus is definitely a team that is looking to knock off Jefferson. I mean, look at them. They're the number 1 scoring offense in 4A. They're averaging 45.7 points per game behind quarterback Devin Riles. And we look at Devin Riles' numbers. He's 91 of 137 on the season. He has over 1,300 passing yards, 13 touchdowns to just 3 interceptions. But he's also a dual threat quarterback. He has over 400 yards and 9 touchdowns on the ground. And then at the running back position, they have the tandem of running backs in Cradle and Riley, Jaden Cradle has 94 carries for 761 yards and 11 touchdowns. Then also has 208 through the air. Then Jamari Riley has 57 carries for 519 yards and 9 touchdowns, and then another 102 through the air. This is a team that's very complete. They can throw the ball and they could run the ball. This is going to be a huge test for Jefferson, who really, throughout the season, their defense has really played great, but this is going to be a whole different level of an offense that they would have to play against. This is going to be really a great matchup if Jefferson ends up playing Carver Columbus, which I think is most likely going to end up happening. And then also you look on the outside, William Bonilla, the wide receiver who's had 30 catches for 521 yards and 4 touchdowns. He's averaging 17.4 yards per catch. This is a very balanced team. They're averaging 407 yards per game. This is really just an explosive offense. Then on defense, Carver Columbus, their offense has really overshadowed their defense, just like Jefferson. They're only allowing 7.7 yards per game. McQuan Merriweather, the defensive tackle, is having a season. Last year, we saw him firsthand as a freshman. This year, his sophomore year, he has 35 tackles at defensive tackle, 24 solo, 3 sacks, and 16 tackles for loss. He's been a force on the inside. And Xavion Evans, the outside linebacker, is leading the team in tackles with 60 tackles. He has 4 sacks, a forced fumbles. He's just been great against the run and blitzing on pass situations. And really, this entire team has been great on defense. They forced 13 turnovers this season. This is a very complete team, and this is a team that could really give Jefferson some trouble in the playoffs.
Well, we almost had some chaos here in the last week of the season with Carver Columbus almost losing to Troup County. Probably, in fact, should have lost. We'll talk about that in a minute when we highlight Troup County. But they almost lost to Troup County. That would have put them in the other side in Marist quadrant as the Region 2 seed, where LaGrange currently is, and that would have been utter chaos. Marist could have faced Carver Columbus early in the playoffs once again this year, and that would have probably been a little less favorable than LaGrange. Carver Columbus can put up some points, but I mean, I just see a lot of shootouts when they get into competitive games.
Yeah, I think
like the one this week.
I think Marist is definitely glad that they don't have to face Carver Columbus in the playoffs this year. I think this is a complete team.
That was a competitive game last year too, and Carver Columbus only got better. As we go to the top left, our final quadrant here, this one's probably the weakest of the 4 quadrants. I'll just go ahead and say that. You take a look at the Region 5 champion in Riverdale. That's a team that lost to Mays in the 3rd week of the season. Ends up winning that region, so that's just obviously not a great, strong region in 4A. So I don't even think I would favor Stevenson in that half of the quadrant, the 3 seed out of Marist region. I would favor them to beat Northwest Whitfield and then Riverdale, make it maybe to the quarterfinals. That's why I said that Hapeville beating Stevenson might not have been a good thing. But then you take a look at the top half here, Benedictine and Troup County. That's the matchup to watch. I kind of like to look at that as the Denmark-Sandy Creek matchup from last year, and that's a game that will likely determine the semifinal bid. Connell, Benedictine, and balanced offense, very talented.
Right, very powerful balanced offense. They average 416 yards per game, about 200 on the ground and 200 through the air. They're led by quarterback Holden Gariner. He's a 3-star with 6 SEC offers. He averages 212 passing yards per game, 70% completion. He's got 21 total touchdowns, so 17 of those come through the air in terms of passing touchdowns. And he's got 4 touchdowns on the ground, although he doesn't run it that much. And he's only thrown 1 interception this whole season. So they're not going to turn the ball over that much through the air and not on the ground either. So they're very solid, very well-rounded offense. And catching the ball for them, their leading receiver, wide receiver Trent Broadnax, he's a Duke commit. He averages just under 90 yards per game and has 11 touchdowns. He's fast and shifty. This guy, he's a guy you want the ball in his hands in space. He can make a lot of guys miss. He's extremely fast, and he's strong too. The problem is with this team is they don't really take the ball away that much on defense. Only 1 time per game on average, and they give up 26 points per game. So I could see them struggling against a team that has a pretty good offense or a great offense. For example, I look towards that game where they played Ware County earlier in the season. They lost big time in that game, and they gave 43 points, and they just couldn't compete on offense. Although they have a really strong offense, they only scored, I think, 23 points in that game. So, the defense is kind of the weak spot in this team, and they could struggle against a team with a solid offense.
Yeah, and Troup County has that solid offense, and they like to run the ball a lot. That'll be just, once again, an interesting first-round matchup. Troup County ends up being the 4 seed out of Region 2. And they could have been the 1 seed. In the last game of the season, Carver Columbus, they were up 29-12 heading into the 4th quarter. Couple turnovers and explosive Carver Columbus offense got them back in the game. Carver ends up winning that 32-29, and that puts Troup County from a 1 seed to a 4 seed as they end up tied for 2nd place with Hardaway and LaGrange. They lost to Hardaway on the year. They beat LaGrange. Tiebreakers put them into the 4 seed. Ends up not being too tough, except they got that Benedictine matchup. If they can win that one, I think they go a long way, probably into the semifinals this year. And they are on a hot streak. Quarterback Teo Todd, he's a freshman. Look for him to get recruited. He is putting up staggering numbers in his freshman year. 1,400 rushing yards and averaging 140 yards per game on the ground. That's unbelievable. Both currently the highest out of any freshman quarterback in the country in yards per game and total yards rushing this year. He's been just unbelievable. They love to run behind. They have a Memphis committed left tackle, Royce White, who just pancakes people all the time, puts them on the ground, and they love to run behind that offensive line. And they've averaged about 340 yards on the ground to 100 in the air. So definitely running it. 39 total touchdowns, 32 of them running. Defensively, they can compete. They don't win games with their defense, though, and you see that out of everybody in Region 2. They got very talented offenses down there in Carver, Columbus, and Hardaway, and Troup County. They basically have struggled to stop teams with good offenses. Carver, they allowed them to come back in that game with their offense. They started 0-3, including a region loss to Hardaway. And without that loss, they could be the number 2 seed. Without the Carver-Columbus loss, they could be the number 1 seed. But I think they can compete here, and that Benedictine matchup is a massive one. I think they've been getting it going, though. They've won 6 out of their last 7 games to finish the year after the opening 3 losses. So I think they're the hot team coming in, not that Benedictine isn't, and I think that's an interesting one to pick. And then top left is West Lawrence and Cairo in the 2 versus 3, but I really like the winner of the Troup County Benedictine to win top left. As we'll highlight your Marist route again to the throughout the state playoffs. Central Carrollton in the first round, and then likely Flowery Branch we like there in the second round. Perry, LaGrange, kind of hard to tell, but one of those two in the quarterfinals. All of this is depending on how far Marist makes it, but Perry, LaGrange likely a quarterfinal matchup, and then top right I think you got to look to Cedartown or Bainbridge to make it out of there and face Marist in the semifinals if they made it. And then championship, if you get that far, it's at Georgia State Stadium, but kind of a lot of teams that could come out, but I think Jefferson has to be the favorite. Carver, Columbus, another team that could compete, but I think those two favorites, and a lot of teams that think they have a chance this year, and I think Marist, I think Bainbridge, Cedartown, and then Carver, Columbus, Jefferson, Benedictine. Those are all teams that have not lost a game to a 4A squad, so they think they could compete this year.
Yeah, and I think with Carver, Columbus, I think the biggest thing is that really close game versus Troup where they had to come back. I think that's actually better for them. I think having to come back in a game and having some adversity going into the playoffs is better for a team that's really been just dominating teams all season. This is a team where their defense had to step up in the second half and stop them and not just completely rely on their offense. This is a defense that has 30 sacks on the season, so they definitely have the ability to step up, and they did in this game, and it took a 4th and 11 with seconds left for their offense to be able to win that game, and they were able to complete the game.
Yeah, I think that's much better than if you're Marist. I mean, obviously you look good throughout the year, but you blew everybody out. You didn't get any super competitive games.
I think that BC game being canceled is going to be huge for them. I think you really need that one competitive game to see what your weaknesses are so you could fix them before the playoffs. They really haven't had that yet this year, so they really don't know what their main weaknesses are.
I missed that one as well. I was looking forward to that game. I think it would have been a thrilling matchup, and so I think that's definitely the case is experience. How can this team compete in a big-time game? And if they get behind, that'll be a big thing to watch is if Marist plays from behind, how do they react in that scenario? As I'm not sure they've trailed yet. They trailed to Arabia Mountain with the early field goal,
Right.
but
Like for a minute.
about
3-0.
2 minutes, yeah.
I think also what the thing is, it's not just the players reacting, but also the coaching and play calling. How do you react when you're down?
Well, I think that was one thing we saw last year at Oconee County is Marist got down and it was kind of panic mode almost. I don't want to say panic mode, but it seemed like that a little bit. They went to the air a little more, and they didn't really, after that first drive, not completing on 4th down, and then they got behind and they almost felt like they had to throw the ball. I think that's why we see more passing currently to try and prepare for that. Let's take let's take a look at our semifinal matchups. I think we're going to go through and pick who we have. Feeney, let's start with you. Who do you think is going to make the semifinals?
Well, I'll start in our bottom right half of the bracket where Marist is, and I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk for Marist. I really think it's not going to be easy, but I have obviously them coming out in the semifinals, and then go to the left side, bottom left. I think it's definitely between Jefferson and Carver Columbus, but I think Jefferson's going to pull it out, and then above them will go. I really, like you said, I don't think that's a very competitive top of the bracket, so I'm going to go with Benedictine there. I think that's the really only option other than Troup County. And then you go to the other side. I have Bainbridge. I really don't think Cedartown is good enough to compete with Bainbridge, so that's going to be my top 4.
JP?
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you on all of those. I think Marist comes out of the bottom right. I think on the top right, I think Bainbridge comes out, but I think a sneaky team might be Islands. They haven't really played anyone this year, but because of that, we don't know how good they might be. And I think obviously Cedartown is a team that we know is going to be good in that part of the bracket. On the top left, I think Benedictine is going to beat Troup County, and then after that, it's going to be an easy ride to the quarterfinals for them. I think Jefferson is the second best team in 4A right now, but I am really concerned about a potential matchup against Carver Columbus. Carver Columbus is a very complete team, and the more and more I look at them, the more and more I really like Carver Columbus, especially when you look at that defensive line and you look at how they've been able to stop the run and really stuff the run the entire year. I think that's definitely a game that you might see Jefferson lose, and you might see them get upset. I could easily see Carver Columbus going into the quarterfinals, but I think I'm going to have to pick Jefferson right now.
I'm going to agree with you on all 4 of those teams, JP. But I think the team most likely to upset one of these 4 major teams here, one of the 4 favorites, is Carver Columbus. I'm going to agree with you there. I mean, you just saw it last year. They gave Marist a run for their money in that second-round game, and I just think they only got better this year, really, on all facets. They're clicking on offense, fantastic offense, defense. They haven't really lost their step from last year where they were very talented, and they can get to the quarterback. I mean, it's not like Jefferson's really passing the ball, but still the ability to get to the quarterback shows you have talent on that defensive line. And I think they're the team that could really give Jefferson the best run for their money kind of early in the playoffs.
I think that Troup County game prepares them for Jefferson, a team that loves to run the ball, and that's what you have to defend against. Definitely just so much to try and stop against Jefferson, including Malachi Starks. He's hard to bring down. He's very hard to tackle. So I got to go with Jefferson there. I think that's, matchup to watch. My game to watch is Troup County Benedictine. I have Troup County winning that one. They're on a roll. They've won since their 0-3 start. They've won every game until that loss to Carver Columbus that, as I said, they should have really won. And could have won, definitely. That does raise a little bit of concern about closing games out, but I think it just gives them experience and likely a close game in the opening round that they'll be definitely prepared for, whereas Benedictine hasn't really played too many top opponents this year. And then top right, Bainbridge Cedartown will be a very interesting game to look for. Contrasting styles in Cedartown that loves to run the ball and Bainbridge that loves to throw the ball. I'll go with Bainbridge there in a close one. And then I got Marist taking on Bainbridge. A big coin toss there is to determine home field advantage if that game does shape up. But certainly going to be some fun action. It's great to have the playoffs back here in the state of Georgia. Always an exciting time here at Marist. Going to be fun, and we'll hope to cover it all the way, hopefully to a state championship run. We'll see how that goes. But that'll start all this Saturday at 5:30, Marist versus Central Carrollton. So you can tune in live on the NFHS network for that game, and then we'll see where it goes from there. Thanks for tuning in live, or I guess on replay as well, to Marist Bracketology, MBC Bracketology this year. It's been fun. Guys, thanks for joining me. It's been good time, and we'll get ready for the playoffs. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and hope you have a happy Thanksgiving.